Ray tracing. If anything demonstrates NVIDIA's dominance of the discrete GPU market, it's that Team Green has successfully managed to use marketing spin to repackage what has often been described as the pinnacle of graphics technology as a gimmicky, Turing-specific GameWorks-style add-on to completely shunt attention away from horrifying price gouging and the lack of a generational performance leap anywhere apart from the extreme top end. Reports indicate that in many cases, regular upscaling can look better than NVIDIA's bespoke AI-based solution. Turing has many issues, a terrible price-performance ratio only being the most notable. But just as important is the fact that Turing's ray tracing feature utilizing its RT cores and supposedly meant to offset the lack of credible performance uplift vis-a-vis Pascal isn't quite what it's cracked up to be. With the impending announcement of new consoles by Sony and Microsoft, there's an understandable amount of hype around 9th-gen console capabilities. With the rumor mill pointing to a Navi/Ryzen combination as the platform of choice, lots of people are interested in the kind of graphics features these new consoles can use. Could Project Scarlett or the PS5 make use of ray tracing with the kind of hardware that they're likely packing? Could they bring effects similar to what we've seen on Turing cards to mainstream console audiences? The answer is, well, kinda. To understand why, we'll have to take a look at what ray tracing actually is, how it differs from conventional raster rendering, and what NVIDIA actually means when it says Turing cards can do ray tracing. Too Long Didn't Read, they can leverage a limited implementation of ray tracing, but within conventional raster renderers and not across the entire pipeline. You see, RTX ray tracing isn't actually, well, ray tracing. It allows for speeding up limited implementations of ray tracing that enhance visuals within conventional renderers that are still utilization rasterization. What's rasterization? Well, when we have conversations about polygon counts and shading, global illumination, SSAO, and the rest, we're actually talking about a whole host of disparate techniques that synergize in a conventional rasterized renderer to deliver a rendered image that looks approximately like it would in real life. In rasterization, 3D objects are made up of millions of 2D triangles that intersect with each other in meshes. These meshes have information on what color value to assign to each pixel on display. Shading refers to all of the techniques used to determine how that color value should change depending on an approximated understanding of how light would interact with that scene. Actual ray tracing is fundamentally different. To oversimplify things, it works in the opposite manner of how you see things in real life. Lights in the real world, the sun, candles, your monitor, or your phone display right now, cast rays of photons that bounce off of other objects and eventually hit your retina, carrying information about the shape of the objects and the manner in which they bounced off of them. In a conventional raster engine, a light source can hit an object and determine what color that object will be. But the diffused light reflected from that object isn't going to then inform the color of surrounding objects, which is the way real life and ray tracing do things. Techniques like global illumination offer a credible approximation of the behavior of diffuse lighting due to light bounce. But they are, at the end of the day, approximations. In an actual ray-traced engine, rays are projected out from the camera, hit objects, bounce around, and then return an output. Unlike rasterization, ray tracing gives you the real thing as far as the behavior of light in the scene and not shader-based approximations. Authentic ray tracing with multiple rays per pixel is extremely intensive computationally and is just not possible in real time with current hardware, not by a long shot. For lighting that remains static in a scene, rasterized renderers often use light maps, which can be done by pre-computing the ray-traced output beforehand for those lights in the scene that don't change at all. This is how you get nice, apparently soft shadowing from static objects like buildings in, say, the Battlefield series. Games like Assassin's Creed Unity took this approach to commendable heights. Of course, in the real world, lights don't remain in the same place all the time. Pre-calculated output would be useless for most of the light interactions in a given scene. You need real-time ray tracing to capture the movement of light as objects and lights move around. This is an order of magnitude more intensive. The newly released ray-traced renderer for Quake 2 puts things in perspective. A 2080 Ti with the largest complement of RT cores is unable to hit a locked 60 FPS with Quake 2's ray-traced renderer. A 22-year-old game that, in rasterization mode, runs well on 2008-era Nokia phones cannot hit a locked 60 FPS on the world's most powerful GPU when real ray tracing is enabled. So, if it wasn't clear yet, current hardware, whether PC or console, is simply incapable of handling complete implementations of ray tracing. You would need hardware that's 5 to 10 times as powerful as today's fastest GPUs to run fully ray-traced editions of today's less intensive games. Moreover, because that kind of power just doesn't exist, most current game engines are raster-based and would have to be rewritten from scratch. As far as fully ray tracing implementations are concerned, the possibility of this happening on PS5 or Project Scarlett is basically non-existent. It's not likely to happen in the PC space either for at least another 5 years. However, and this is what RTX cards have shown us so far, we have the capability today to utilize real-time ray tracing within conventional rastered engines to improve upon specific parts of the rendering pipeline. Take Metro Exodus, for instance. The engine's still raster-based, but ray tracing can be enabled for light cast by outdoor sources, such as the sun. This makes specific scenes, particularly outdoor environments, more physically correct and lifelike. Even this, however, tanks performance on the RTX cards, especially at higher resolutions. Keeping in mind that AMD's current PC flagship, the Radeon 7, only keeps pace with the RTX 2080, and we would expect the 9th gen consoles to have GPU capabilities somewhere in between an RTX 2060 and 2070, but without dedicated RT hardware. Ray tracing calculations are obviously possible without fixed function hardware like the RT cores on Turing GPUs. With enough hardware grunt, regular GPUs can pull off RTX effects just fine. QT VKPT can run on the 2080 Ti and high-end Radeon parts as well, albeit at lower resolutions. It's also important to note that developers have had very little time to play around with ray tracing. It's only been a few months since the RTX cards launched, after all. And different approaches would have different performance implications. While replacing the global lighting system with ray tracing in AAA titles is likely to be beyond the capabilities of the 9th gen consoles, we can easily see Project Scarlett and the PS5 utilizing ray traced shadows. Indie titles and smaller scale, less interactive games, think like the next generation's version of the Order 1886, could also utilize ray tracing for a wider range of functions, free from the constraint of rendering large open worlds. At the end of the day, it's fairly clear to us that the time for real ray tracing has yet to come. We just don't have graphics hardware that's fast enough. We will, however, reach that point sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. If AMD and Nvidia double down on the idea of adding fixed function ray tracing hardware to their GPUs, as seen in the RTX cards, that day may be sooner rather than later. In the meantime, the use of ray tracing for enhancing specific aspects of the rendering pipeline and rasterized engines is likely to increase, with the kind of power likely available to the PS5 and Project Scarlett. These kinds of ray-traced experiences are likely to make their way over to console. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.